Hello and welcome back to the channel. Today I'm going to show you a method of designing that can cut a lot of modeling time out of your workflow. As an illustrator, it's not always necessary to start from scratch. Many illustrators use programs like Poser, Character Creator, the new MetaHuman Creator, or just pre-made 3D models to add realism and flexibility to their workflow. Today I'm going to use Mixamo. You may have already seen this somewhere on the internet. There are plenty of tutorials about it already. But I'm going to show you how to create a character design that isn't limited to what's available in their default character set. So there are actually a couple options for using Mixamo. If you click on Browse Characters here and sign in, it does require an account if you've never used this before, but you have a set of pre-made characters that you can use, or you can upload your own and use auto-rigging to animate your own meshes. You can even create your own base mesh, but for efficiency, you can also find free and paid options on markets like Gumroad and ArtStation. We're not going to cover this here, but it's a good avenue to take if you want to further customize your base model. So when you're choosing a model to use, I recommend using simpler models, but one that still has a face if you want to save time. But there are also mannequins in here that you can use if you just want to have a basic body to design on top of. Just keep in mind it'll take more work to reconstruct facial features and clothing and whatnot later. And that can be avoided by just picking something simple that you can work on top of. Now we're not going to be using the costume that's already on the character, but it is good to have a base to start from rather than just the blank slate of the mannequin. So I'm going to pick this one because it's simple, it's basic, it doesn't have a lot of stuff hanging off of it, and I know I'm going to be able to adjust this to my liking. So when you're looking through the animations, disregard the type of animation and just consider whether it might have a pose that could work for your final illustration. Even something weird like dying, even if your character is not dying, there may be a single pose in here somewhere that you can use that will help in your final illustration. You can also search, and I'm going to search for magic spell because I already know what I'm going to use here. So once you've picked your animation, you can pause it and you can scrub through and try to find a single static pose that might work for you. Keep in mind later you can adjust the body parts if they're not exactly where you need them, but you want to be in the rough ballpark because there's only so much that you can do to adjust the model. And then when you pick the animation, it'll automatically apply it to the character you've created and you can download it over here. Make sure you pick with skin, FBX, and then just leave everything else default. So once you're in Blender, you're just going to go down to File, Import, FBX, and then choose the file that you just downloaded. And there she is, she's in your Blender file. If you have the timeline open, you can scrub through just like you did in Mixamo and try to find that animation that you thought would work for you. It's likely going to be the same frame or close to where it was on Mixamo. So the way to move this around is by changing the armature, not the character, because these are parented, and when you move this, because it's parented to that bone structure, it's going to act all strange because it's trying to stick to where the armature is. And so for that reason, you need to select the armature, tab over into pose mode, and then I change into wireframe shading so that you can see the full thing. And now you can choose your bones. And using the typical GR shortcuts, you can change her position to where you want it. And I want her looking forward. So that's what I've done here. One other thing to keep in mind is unless you add a new keyframe or bake the animation into this set, as soon as you move this, it's going to revert back and not save the change that you made. So you need to make sure that if you're updating the model, it's about where you want it, because if you try to change it, you're going to have to start over. So you have a couple options here. And the first one is to change the model over into the T-pose. And then you can just start adding pieces on top of the mesh. And I'm just going to do a silly example here just to show you how it works. But say we want to give her a giant snowball head. We can choose the snowball, choose the body, make sure the body is selected second, and then Command P, parent, and vertex triangle. Now, when you select the armature and go back into the pose position, your new objects will follow the character and the animation. And we can use this to build whatever we want on top of it and just keep parenting and adding to it until we've got what we want. But the key is you want to model in the rest position because it makes it easier to add pieces to it. And then when you pose it, the pieces will deform correctly rather than trying to place it in a weird 3D space. The other option you have is once the character is posed, you can freeze it and then you can sculpt on top of it. The only problem with this is that you can't use symmetry and you can't use the T-pose because this requires decoupling from the armature so that the animation is frozen. If you try to sculpt on top of this while there's an armature and it's all parented, you're going to get some weird effects. Now you could sculpt on pieces and then add it to the mesh the way I just showed you, but you're not going to be able to deform the actual mesh like you can if you unparent it all. So once you have your pose and you want to sculpt on top of it, you're going to have to select the whole character and then Option Alt P to clear parent and then clear parent with transforms. And now you'll see that all these pieces are separate outside of the armature. The next step here is to apply the armature on each piece, and that will freeze the animation where it is. So you should be able to, from there, delete the armature, and your character will be stuck in place. And now all the keyframes are gone, and it no longer responds to any animation. But you can grab the body parts here, hop over into sculpt mode, and start sculpting on your character. And this is not a good example, but I'm just showing you that you can change it how you want. So here's an example of that method I was just talking about where I froze the pose and then on top of that static pose, I remeshed it and I added some texture here. I pulled this in from somewhere, a model that I pulled off the internet, and I just lit it. And then from there, I took it over into Photoshop, and with some painting and photo bashing, this is what I did with it. So this is a useful technique. You would do this typically if you need to freeze it and run a separate animation. I didn't need to do it for this one, but I was experimenting with the workflow and I did it anyway. For the one I'm about to show you, I needed to freeze the animation because I wanted to add a cloth simulation on top. And when I started the timeline again to run the cloth simulation, it was going to clear out the pose that I had set up. So I froze it and then I created the cloth animation on top of it. So I'm not going to do the sculpting method here. I'm going to add new mesh parts and parent them to the model like I showed you in the first step. So that's it for this technique. From here on out, it's just basic modeling, parenting like I showed you, and then over in Photoshop, it's just layering details and playing with the composition and painting, making it look less 3D and more like a painting. And so the rest of this is going to be a time lapse. So I hope you got some value out of this. I hope it helped you. If you could, please don't forget to like, subscribe, hit the notification bell, and I will see you in the next one.